everyone. Welcome to Happy Hour with the Maryland Historical Society. We're so glad that you've joined us today.
This evening, Martha and I will be joined by two of our colleagues who work at the museum to unlock some secrets and stories of a current exhibition we have on view through December, Spectrum of Fashion. I am Martha Capera, the museum's public programs manager.
And my name is Martha Osterbiel. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Maryland Historical Society.
We just would like to remind you before we get started that next Thursday, we will celebrate our annual Colonial Market Day virtually this year with a free virtual tavern trivia on July 23rd. We'll be testing your colonial knowledge as well as offering you a chance to pose questions to some colonial guests. So check out our Facebook page and website for more information for this very fun program.
We try to make our programs as interactive as possible, and tonight we'll be asking you all to really utilize the chat function. To participate in the chat, click on the icon at the bottom of your screen and make sure you're sending the chat to panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see your message. You can also ask questions for our guests or for Margot and myself at any point using the Q&A icon. We are going to do our best to get to your questions during the program, and if we're unable to get to all of them, we'll try and provide answers in a follow-up email after the program sometime next week.
So it's time to uncork and unwind. Let's toast to unlocking the exhibition behind the scenes of Spectrum of Fashion. So as you may already know, the Maryland Historical Society holds a vast collection of clothing that spans 4 centuries through our fashion archive, which is the largest and the most comprehensive fashion archive in the state of Maryland, and it ranks paramount in the nation. The exhibition, Spectrum of Fashion, unlocks some of these greatest archival treasures by highlighting the breadth of the Maryland Historical Society's costume collection, featuring nearly 100 examples of women's and men's clothing and accessories. The exhibition speaks toward a broader American narrative, but focuses on Maryland's social history and the most important stories that these Marylanders tell through their garments. And actually, Martha and I are virtually in the Spectrum of Fashion exhibit.
We wish we could be there in person, but for tonight, this will do. And we also wish that we could welcome all of you there in person, and we promise that it will happen soon. This evening's program is going to take a deeper and a more personal look at how and what historians are able to interpret through these garments, much of which is not actually presented in the exhibition itself. So to do this, Margot and I are really thrilled to introduce 2 of our colleagues, Ashlee Anderson and Emily Bach, to the program. Welcome, Ashlee and Emily. Hopefully you guys, there you are. So at the museum, we all work together on a multitude of projects, and it's really nice to be able to share your talents and be here together virtually. Since it is an early happy hour here on the East Coast, I'm curious about what the 2 of you are drinking tonight, if anything.
Yeah, so I've got a spiked lemonade for this evening, so a fun little happy hour.
Nice.
And I have a nice gin and tonic with purple colored gin, just to add some pizzazz.
Let's look at that one more time, Emily. Ooh. Oh, that is really pretty. You upstaged us. Martha, what are you drinking?
I am enjoying a little spiked, a blood orange, like an Italian soda with a little vodka added in. It matches my shirt.
It does. It's blending in there. And but we all have very summery drinks. And I have a wine strawberry margarita situation happening. Oh, nice. There you go, right there. So, okay, I think we're ready to roll. Ashlee, You are the museum's digital learning specialist within the education department. Audience members may recognize you from educational initiatives that you manage and from social media, in particular, the Ask a Historian video series on Facebook.
Yeah. So along with the social media posts that we've been providing throughout this kind of unprecedented time, I also manage the virtual field trips that we have at the museum. So groups, not only school groups, but adult groups as well, can connect in with us at the museum, and we are able to provide a variety of programs. One that is also on fashion and the Spectrum of Fashion exhibit. So this is fun. I'm getting a little crossover today.
Yeah, that's great. And hopefully you have some fans out there.
I hope so.
Yeah, maybe not students, but maybe some adults or parents. And Emily, you are currently the Curatorial Assistant at the Maryland Historical Society, and you played a vital role in the exhibition that is behind us in the production of Spectrum of Fashion, for one thing. And recently you were highlighted in Be More Art as a sort of textile whisperer and fashion historian. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your job, about the article? It said some really cute things, especially about bugs and you, and about your role as a curatorial assistant.
Yes, so I was trained in costume history and textile conservation. So that is what Be More Art was focusing on, and how you can look at certain details that really reveal bigger stories, which I'm excited that we get to talk about tonight. And then with bugs, for any vintage lover out there, which I'm sure there are many watching, just because, you know, if you love historic clothing, you probably have some of your own. With carpet beetles, which are textiles' worst enemies usually, you just put them in a freezer for 48 hours and 24 out, 48 in and 24 out again. So I always get really excited talking about those.
Wow, I'm sure the chat is going to explode because people really like that useful information that we've seen.
We're really excited that the two of you guys are able to take a deep dive into a few of the garments that have, you know, really interesting qualities about them and lend some really unique stories for today's program. And to make things a little fun, since we have branded this as a happy hour, although I understand that we probably have people joining us from around the country and from different time zones, but Margot and I thought we would encourage a drinking game during the program. So every time you hear the following words, Margot, what are they?
Costume, fashion, alteration, and provenance. Now, I was an archaeologist and I would always say provenance, so I was saving that word for last, but provenance.
So every time you hear one of those words come out of Ashlee or Emily's mouth, we'd like you to take a sip. I also just placed those words in the chat for you guys, and we'll be reminding you when you hear them throughout the program. So good luck. Remember to use the Q&A to ask any questions. We will get to a few of them at the end. And without further ado, Ashlee and Emily, take it away.
Thank you. So again, we want to welcome everyone to our Between the Seams Spectrum of Fashion deep dive. Emily, I'll let you take over and give a little background on the exhibit.
Yeah, so working with the exhibit and helping with the installation and curation of it, I was working every day on these beautiful garments. And there are so many stories that we just could not include in the exhibit or even the catalog, because that would just be like at least 500 pages of stories. So tonight we want to give an idea of what are the small things that we as costume historians look at and what we can pull from that. So to start off, we are going to begin with a 1780s wedding dress. Now it's interesting because it was also a dress in the 1740s, which we were able to tell by looking at the silk and a little bit of the provenance. So according to the provenance, or the family history of the object, it started as Elizabeth Woodrop Davies' wedding dress in 1740. You can tell this because of the silk brocade with those floral motifs. They're very large, very rococo in style, which was very popular in the 1740s, 1750s. Elizabeth then passed it down to her daughter, Catherine Davy McKim, and then she restyled it to be more representative of 1780s fashion. And you can see this with the bodice. In the 1740s, when the mother would have worn this dress, the bodice wouldn't have closed totally. You would have this void that was created and a stomacher, which was this decorative triangular panel that would be used to cover the void. And I have two photographs of pieces that showcase what those look like, so you can visualize it better. Well, by the 1780s, when her daughter inherited the dress, these stomachers were not in style. The style by then was a closed bodice, which you can see here with an up-close image of the 1780s olive green silk brocade dress. And we can tell that Catherine actually altered this by piecing together extra pieces of fabric from the silk brocade. And I did some little scribble so that you can see where these lines are. So anywhere you see that like almost very dark line, that's actually pieces of fabric. So one, you have this very abstract triangle, and that just shows how genius these people were with combining motifs, making sure that they flowed and weren't too disruptive, and making sure that they weren't going to waste a very expensive and very high quality textile. The textile itself was much more expensive. And it's also fascinating because it was worn in the 1740s as a wedding dress and then passed down to her daughter to wear to her own wedding in the 1780s.
So Emily, I have a couple questions for you. First, what was the original color of this piece?
Yeah, so this is also fascinating because at first glance, it's this very uniform olive green, and it seems like that is how it should be. But when we looked inside the pleats or the folds of the skirt where, there was no light that was getting into it, no wear and tear, it's actually this very deep chocolate brown. So that just shows how dyes evolve over time. Brown especially, it's a pretty unstable dye.
So I think that's really interesting, since I don't think today we see a lot of brown or olive green wedding dresses. So when did like the white wedding dress come into fashion?
Yeah, this is a very common question, and many will cite Queen Victoria as the kickstarter to this craze of wearing white to weddings, which is understandable. She was royalty, and her wedding was publicized in terms of people describing what she was wearing, and she was wearing a white dress. In fact, however, women were wearing white wedding dresses well before that. There are examples of 1770s dresses being white, all the way up to 1880s, women having dark green wedding dresses. The main point of it is that weddings were a special occasion where a bride and the groom would purchase the textile that was the highest quality they could afford and something that they could wear beyond their wedding. In today's culture, we wear wedding dresses for the night of the wedding, and then it goes in the closet into storage. Textiles being expensive as they were back then, you were going to use it as much as you could, which is exemplified with this dress because it was passed down from the 1740s and then to the 1780s. Also, white, it's very indicative of a wealthy person, because those who are wearing white, they are not doing any labor, any chores really that would risk getting any soils onto the dress itself.
So let's fast forward a little bit, kind of keeping on the theme of special occasion dresses, and check out this next very special dress.
Yes, this is also a very cool dress. It has a very interesting provenance where it's actually associated with a woman, Sally Hollingsworth, she wore this supposedly to a ball held in honor of George Washington's inauguration, which is fascinating, but automatically we were a bit suspicious because whenever you get some story of origin with a dress like this connected to such a prominent event in our country's history, you're kind of wary. You start to question, oftentimes family histories are passed down, and objects or dresses, they're associated with the most prominently known family member or a specific event in that family's history. And it can be completely wrong, or at times it can be absolutely correct. So it's very much, we have to investigate to make sure that we are presenting the most accurate story. So with this one, we started digging, and dating-wise, in terms of construction, it matched 1780s, specifically late 1780s. Like we talked about before with the previous dress, with that bodice, this one closes in the front, which was the style of the 1780s, very, very popular. Then with the silk itself, that's a great identifier for just doing a wide range of dating. So with the previous dress, that was a 1740 silk brocade, and you can really see it in this comparison because it's very large. It has a lot of emphasis on the curvature of the flower stems, the leaves. And then on the right, in a stark contrast, this is the inaugural ball gowns, silk brocade, and the flowers are minuscule. They're just placed randomly almost, and that is very indicative of 1780s going into the 1790s. So that's one way that we were able to point, okay, it's in the right range. And then another way that we were able to tell was that the sleeves were very tight and long on this dress. Sleeves are a huge indicator for year ranges, where you can get very specific to almost the year. With late 1780s, sleeves are getting longer, they're getting tighter. This dress, it has like a large sleeve cuff, but it is actually decorative. Underneath is the tight sleeve itself. So we decided, okay, the date matches, so we can work from that and see if, did she actually wear this dress to George Washington's inaugural ball in Philadelphia? Well, then we had another curveball thrown at us where this is an unfinished sleeve cuff. You can see that part of the cuff is just falling off. It was never stitched into place. It's not a case of, 200-year-old thread rotting and therefore just becoming weak and the fabric falling off. It's never sewn into place. So it was unfinished, which brought questions. Why would this woman go to a ball wearing an unfinished dress? That's not, the most memorable look to appear. So we just started dressing the mannequin to see if we could find anything else out. And then we were padding. In each mannequin, it is custom carved, custom padded to a garment. Just like today, everyone has a unique body shape. That's no different from people in the past. Every mannequin is representative of who these people were. So we started padding and we realized that she was in fact pregnant and quite far along. So I have two photos where this is a three-piece maternity dress from Colonial Williamsburg that shows both what the woman would look like when she was pregnant with the dress, but also it was a reversible garment. So once she wasn't pregnant, she could return this to the normal shape that she was usually before pregnancy. And then placed next to this, you can see with the side profile of the inaugural gown that she was pretty far along.
So based on looking at these mannequins and finding all these secrets with this dress, to keep that silhouette, what kind of undergarments would she have worn during her pregnancy?
Yes, so women would still wear their stays in the 18th century. Stays being the 18th century term for a corset as we know today. It was a very conical look. If you see on the photo to the left, you can see that it's very straight. It's very linear. So with pregnancy, you were still trying to wear the clothes you were already owning, and you would just adjust your stays. So they had specific ones that were side lacing, so you would just increase the lacing to accommodate for your growing belly bump. And here are some examples of other dresses that were for pregnant women. The main emphasis is that women were still in the social sphere when they were pregnant. They were trying to be involved in society until they were giving birth, sometimes the day of. They were adjusting these dresses so that they could be sometimes reverted back to her shape before pregnancy. So it's just really interesting because, yes, compared to today, wearing stays during pregnancy is extremely restrictive. Just because today's clothing, it's very loose, it's meant to move easily, and it puts comfort first. But also these women, they were wearing stays since they were children as training. And once your body becomes dependent on that support, it was actually beneficial to an extent when they were pregnant and having this additional weight put onto them.
So that is incredible. So did we decide whether she attended the inaugural ball or not?
Yeah, so that's the question we will never know. It's possible she was too pregnant to attend and make that trip. It's possible that she actually gave birth and therefore never made it. It's one of those things we can never actually have a conclusive answer, but we can make some speculations, ask these questions through educated research and understanding the minuscule details that are seen in the dress.
So that's one of the like fun things, at least for me as a historian who didn't study fashion history, like learning all of these special kind of insider looks into these garments. And I know the next garment that we are going to talk about also has a hidden story.
Yeah, and then also I'm just curious if anyone in the chat would wear one of these dresses and which one, and if they would prefer their own maternity clothes that they maybe wore.
That's a good question.
So moving to the next garment, which has another mysterious story. I'll give this to Ashlee to introduce.
Yeah, so this next dress we're going to look at was worn by someone in the Ridgely family. So the Ridgeleys, they were a family that lived at Hampton Mansion in Towson, Maryland. So this might look familiar to some of you. And they were a very wealthy family. And when it is open, I do believe you can still visit the estate. So we're going to talk about this pink Ridgely dress that we like to call it. So we're jumping forward into the 1840s. Emily, will you tell us what makes this dress so special?
Yeah, so what makes this dress special is just the mystery to it. These garments, the Maryland Historical Society received a large number of garments associated with the Ridgely family when Elizabeth III passed away. Usually we can associate a specific dress with one of the Ridgely wearers, and it's great, it's well documented, but then we have this one. No known wearer, and the alterations made to it just add to the mystery of this unidentified wearer. So to begin, it started its life in the 1830s. So I have a fashion plate on the screen to the left from 1832, a fashion plate being this detailed illustration of the most up-to-date fashion that a woman would want to implement into her own wardrobe. So you can see with the cape, with the woman in the gray silk dress, that it really creates this triangular look over top of those huge gigot sleeves, which is just French for leg of mutton, because everything in French sounds better than English. So it creates this very identifiable silhouette. With the pink Ridgely, which is in the middle, her 1830s cape exists, and it survives, and you can see it in the professional photo of this pink Ridgely dress. In the 1830s iteration, it would have created that triangular look, and it would have been supported by those gigot sleeves. But its current iteration is 1840s, first half. And to give an idea of what other dresses of that time looked like, there's another fashion plate next to it on the right, and that shows also a wearer who is wearing another capelet. So you can see how This cape, although is worn in the 1830s for a specific silhouette, it was also transferred into the next decade, and it was a seamless transition. But what really created mystery is, why was it altered and who was it altered for? We don't know the original wearer, but the current iteration is for someone of substantial height. So here I have a close-up of the dress, and you may be able to see it without any identifiers or symbols, but there is evidence that this was let out about 6 inches, meaning it added 6 inches to the wearer's height. And I did a little bit of quick identification of it. You can see with those lines, it's throughout the skirt. The skirt ones with the arrows, that's about a 3-inch length difference to make it longer for someone of a taller height. And then you can also see that the bodice was also extended to be 3 inches longer for the wearer, which is fascinating. We reached out to colleagues at Hampton House to see if they knew of any Ridgely family members who were of this height, and they said, no, it's not Eliza III. We have documentation of her. We have a dress that Eliza III wore, this wearer. And then to add to even more mystery, you can't see it here because it is truly inside the dress, but on the left side of the back bodice, there is this padding made of lamb's wool that at first may create questions of who would just put padding on one side of a bodice. It's just incomplete. Well, women, they were really striving for this very smooth, finished look with their clothing. If you were wearing something that fit you perfectly, made from a dressmaker, it was going to be custom tailored to you. Because of this, that layer of padding is actually signifying that this wearer had a case of scoliosis. So that was a discovery that took us for a shock, because we couldn't find any documentation of someone who, in the Ridgely family, was not only tall, but also had this medical condition. But when she was wearing this dress, because of the padding, it created this illusion that she did not. So that's fascinating in its own right, of just the genius of dressmakers during this time.
That's amazing. So do we have it narrowed down to maybe somebody that we've kind of figured out who it belonged to?
Yeah, it's possible it could have been worn by Eliza's aunt, who is also known as Didy, or it could also have been worn by Eliza III's her friend, who is also suspected of being her life partner. But like the inaugural gown, these questions just will probably not ever be answered with, this conclusive answer. But we can guess, we can make these connections, and maybe someone who finds this jackpot of documentation can make this connection and say, this is who definitively wore this.
I hope someone does find that, but just, again, so fun to learn about all these different people and how much we can learn about a person based on their clothing. So I guess kind of keeping with that theme, we're going to keep with the Ridgeleys as well, because the Ridgeleys and many, many other wealthy families would use their clothing also as a way to show outwardly their wealth. So not only did clothes display their own social standings, but how they also dressed enslaved people or indentured servants was also a way for them to outwardly express how much wealth they had. So I think we're going to pop over now to the purple livery. So first question, what is a livery?
Yes, so a livery is a specific uniform that wealthy families would dress their enslaved people or their indentured servants in. Those who were wearing liveries, they were in highly visible positions. So think of a coachman or a waiter, someone who is going to be contacting with, people at a ball in the house or at a dinner. Because they were highly visible, the family wanted to show their friends that they were so wealthy that they could dress their enslaved individuals in these high quality articles of clothing.
So far we've seen clothing worn by women. And this is something we see within our Spectrum of Fashion exhibit broadly too. We see a lot of women's clothing and not a lot of men's pieces. So why do we have fewer men's pieces?
It's kind of similar to today, where men they do tend to wear their clothes for longer periods of time than women. Men's fashion in general, it doesn't change as much or as drastically as women's fashion does. Even like maybe you've been able to pick up at least some trends with the few dresses we have spoken of so far, that silhouettes are, they can be so different even just in 5 years. Because of that, you're updating your wardrobe or you're buying new clothes. For men, on the other hand, it can be, oh, the tie, it's widening or it's getting narrower. Or, oh, my trousers, they're just wide now. Or maybe they're just an inch tighter this time around. So that's part of it. Also, specifically with livery that was worn by men, these people did not have a voice in history. So they weren't donating their clothes to museums that were associated with the very elite, wealthy white families in the area. So they would just be handed down somehow.
This is really special then that we have this in our collection. How or why did this livery survive?
So it's really fascinating. And it has its own sad side to it, just because, as I said, those who were enslaved, they did not have the voice that others did. But because people associated clothing with someone who was more prominently known in their family, that's typically how these survive. For this one, it was because the family thought that Charles Carroll, the barrister, wore this outfit in the 1770s.
Wow.
So they donated it to the Maryland Historical Society. He was a delegate to the Second Constitutional Convention, so very prominently known Marylander, very important in early American history. So it sounds like a great part of material culture, a great story to share. But once you really analyze this purple livery, you realize that it is in fact a livery and not a gentleman's suit from the 1770s. First off, through research and looking through Charles Carroll, the barrister's account books, he wore specifically suits and ditto. And I have an example on this PowerPoint so you can understand what that means. Men were wearing 3-piece suits. If you're going to showcase your wealth, you are going to get all 3 pieces, or at least the jacket and the breeches, made in the same fabric. Sometimes this would be a very expensive silk brocade or a very fine wool. That would just visually display that you can afford this much disposable textile. In contrast with the livery, this is, this purple velvet jacket and waistcoat, but then these white wool breeches. Nowhere in his account books was he buying these white wool breeches. He always stated he wanted suits and ditto. So that was this sign that, okay, this was probably not his. Also, we went with our costume dating techniques. This is 1840 to 1845, way off. It is not 1770s, which is always a fun game to play with Alexandra Deutsch and Allison Tolman. We always love to investigate and guess what the date is of a certain piece before we even know anything about it. With this jacket, you can see it's for a man with broad shoulders, more associated with doing hard labor or needing to have extra movement in his arms, which would make sense for either an enslaved man or an indentured servant. We don't know if this man was enslaved or an indentured servant because no story associated with him exists, since they believe that this was Charles Carroll the barrister's. That's all we know. Additionally, this livery has button fly, like front fly buttons for the breeches, which is typically what you see in men's clothes today. And that appeared in the 1840s. You can see an example in the bottom right image. That's your button fly. Previously, in like the 1770s, which is what they thought it would be that front fall flap that you see on the top right. You know, you had those buttons and then you would unbutton, and that's how the breeches would open. With all of this in consideration, it was 1840, 1845. It was all hand sewn, so it was before, you know, the wider accessibility to the sewing machine. So that was another indicator. All of those things came together to create, well, to reveal that this is a very rare survival of pre-emancipation, pre-abolition of slavery worn by someone.
Wow. So again, just all these pieces are incredible. So I think it's time to move on to our next piece. Still keeping in the theme of the Ridgeleys, we have this stunning blue Ridgely dress. And as we can see, just by looking at these images to the untrained eye, this dress is absolutely in pristine condition. So Emily, tell us a little bit about who wore this and why it looks so good.
Yeah, she's often, well, I always give garments a she or a he, depending on if it's a woman's or a man's outfit. So this dress, it's often a favorite of people in the exhibit because it is so pristine, it is so gorgeous. All of that cording is hand sewn. So just an absolute demonstration of a woman's expertise in needlework. So it's in pristine though, it's pristine condition, and it has a very sad reasoning for that. Margaretta Sophia Howard is the wearer of this dress, and she and her husband went on this European trip, which was very common in the mid 19th century. So while they were in Rome in 1872, sadly her husband Charles passed away. She purchased this dress during that vacation, during that European trip. So she never really had a chance to wear it because she had to immediately integrate into mourning.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the process of mourning and how you express that through your clothing?
Yeah, so mourning protocol in the 19th century, it was both vague. I have a quote here that talks about the limit of mourning can be from like 6 months to maybe 4 or 5 years, but also very specific at the same time, where women had to wear specific fabrics that did not have any shine in it. They wanted to be as dull and muted as could be. It was black. Their collars and cuffs, those were black as well. Usually collars and cuffs are white. They would also wear jewelry that was not reflective, so it'd be black as well. Jet beading was very common. And if they were in true deep mourning, they would have a very distinctive black lace veil over them. There were many stages of mourning. So you had full mourning, which was immediately after a loved one passed away. And then you go into half mourning. So you can introduce grays, purples. You can have your white collars and cuffs again. Maybe introduce some metal jewelry that isn't just jet black. So that's a large part of society. Everyone experiences death. It's something that people were constantly having to adjust their wardrobes to. Mourning periods varied. So for a spouse, it could be 18 months you're in deep mourning. For a father, maybe it's 12 months. But typically it wouldn't last longer than 5 years. Margaretta Sophia Howard mourned for the rest of her life. So until she passed away. So it was about 32 years that she was in deep mourning, which is not the norm back then.
She also joins the ranks of people who mourned for the remainder of their life with Queen Victoria. After Albert passed away, she was in mourning for the remainder of her life, which was about 40 years. And
Wow.
Then Mary Lincoln also mourned the death and the assassination of her husband for the remainder of her life as well, which lasted about 17 years. So
And also her kids she had to mourn too.
Yes, yeah, she lost 3 out of her 4 boys throughout her lifetime. So Mary Lincoln, she makes my heart bleed, just because she did spend a good chunk of her life in mourning and in those mourning clothes. So I think now is a good time to talk a little bit more about something a little more lighthearted and happy. So let's take a look at this next stunning purple dress.
Yes, this one is one of my favorites. I think it is so ornate with all of those embellishments. I love something that is that flashy. It's phenomenal. And it also has more of a story connected to society with the economic and technological revolutions happening, mid-19th century going forward. I have a fashion plate on the left that showcases, 1871, all of this intense volume in the back. You're getting bustles, you're getting these ribbon trims, you have fringe, which you can see in the purple shot silk dress. And it's interesting because, once again, this was a dress that did not begin as one created in 1870 or 1871. It actually was created in the late 1860s, which you wouldn't know, but all of that trim, all of that ribbon, all of that fringe, and the bows, those were added in 1870, 1871. The wearer probably went to a dressmaker, showed her a fashion plate similar to the one on the left, and said, please update my wardrobe so that it matches this. Late 1860s, it's not as embellished, so in order to fit into top fashion, just add some ribbon, add some embellishments, which is great. And it's also indicative of a technological revolution. The sewing machine by the 1870s, it is much more streamlined. It's much more accessible to people and just the average household. Before, in the 1850s, when it was starting to become more accessible to the everyday person, typically women, there would be one woman who would purchase it, and then her neighbors or her group of friends, they would come over, give her some money, and then they could use the sewing machines themselves.
So
by the 1870s, it's, seamstresses, dressmakers have them.
So since this dress is such a look, I want to ask you, Emily, and then I want people to chime in the chat as well. What modern gown or red carpet look would you compare this to or equate this to today?
Yeah, it's so hard. I won't lie, I'm not the best with pop culture. I'll just say that's because of my historian self. But when I think of it, it just has such this huge impact on your eyes. It has so much going on that part of me I can't stop thinking of the tuxedo dress from Siriano, because it's such a large footprint, literally, because it's wide, has this cage crinoline / bustle, and it's also just very in your face with, I'm here and this is what I'm wearing.
I'm seeing a lot of fun responses here in the chat. Someone's comparing this to Rihanna's yellow Met Gala cape.
Ooh.
So yeah, just a great big statement piece, which I love. And this dress is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. It's one of my favorites. It's very cool.
It's so eye-catching. Someone else also saying maybe a Panina Tournay wedding gown.
Yeah.
I could do that too. But
yeah.
Speaking of fashion and fashion icons, let's go to our next piece here.
Yes.
Frances Cleveland and her beautiful red dress. So we actually have 3 dresses in this exhibit that were worn by women during their pregnancies. And this is another example of that. So can you expand a little bit, Emily, on the history of maternity wear? I know we touched on it a smidge, but let's get back into it.
Yes, so Frances was pregnant when she wore this cape. And that's why I didn't include it. I didn't want to give it away when I showed the one slide with the 3 maternity dresses. So she adapted this dress frequently. it started in the 1890s, and she just kept reworking it until the early 1900s when she had her last child, Frances, in 1903. So very interesting, and yeah, a lot of reworking and alterations.
So tell me, how did Frances kind of make this dress her own?
So here's a picture of the side profile where you can see that she's pregnant. This is her son, Francis. And next, this is how she altered them. This is a close-up of the inner bodice, and you can see that she inserted this red silk satin dart that expanded the bust so that when she was growing in her chest, she was fine, it was accommodating, and it wasn't uncomfortable for her. Another interesting fact is that Frances was very proud of her bust. She was known as being a very beautiful woman. Advertisements, products, they would use her face to advertise their product, to the point that that is why you can't use someone's image without their consent, because people were just using her face on everything.
Everywhere.
Yeah, it was everywhere. And she knew she was beautiful, and she took advantage of it. She showed off her chest. You can see that that is not a fold in the fabric. She actually folded that piece of fabric down, which was the original collar, and stitched it down. Initially, it was a very high neck cape. She changed it into a plunging neckline that not only showcased her assets, but it also probably made breastfeeding easier when she was, after she gave birth to her children.
So since Frances Cleveland is such a historic fashion icon, and again, I want people in the chat to weigh in on this too, but who would you compare Frances Cleveland to today?
Yeah.
In terms of fashion, in terms of
I hate to say it,
clothes.
but I always think of like the Kardashians, just because they're so well known, even if you don't keep up with them, or if you're not familiar with who they are or what they have done. It sounds bad, but
I mean, their faces are everywhere
making
too.
Clothing decisions that people were shocked by and people maybe imitated. She was a fashion icon, and people knew who she was.
Yeah. I'm seeing again in the chat here, a lot of people are saying, yes, Kim Kardashian.
Yeah.
Someone asked, wasn't Mary Lincoln also proud of her bust? She was. She absolutely was, to the point of where the president would say, take some of that fabric from the end of your dress and maybe put it up a little higher.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this plunging neckline, that was absolutely a fashion statement.
Yeah.
Today,
also, Frances was in her 20s when she married Grover Cleveland, who was in his 50s. So, no, she's proud of her body. She was young.
Yeah. Someone's also comparing this to J-Lo and her green Versace dress.
Yes, that's perfect.
So I think we do need to keep cruising on.
Yeah. On this slide, that's just another quick alteration she did. She added what's circled so that it would go over her bump easily.
So
next, we have this linen duster, and you are very familiar with the life of Sally Webster Dorsey.
So Sally Webster Dorsey, she is fascinating because she was the state librarian in the early 1900s. And this is amazing because she held an elected office and a prominent state office at a time where women were not able to vote. So she was the state librarian from 1912 until 1916. She earned herself a listing in the Women's Who's Who of America in 1914 to 1915. And she was also from a very prominent Baltimore family, very much a socialite. She appears within the Baltimore Sun newspaper several times. But what I love that we're highlighting here is her workwear. So this piece, as we can see, is totally different than anything we've looked at so far. So can you tell us a little bit more about this linen duster?
Yeah, so it's a linen duster, which from the name, it was this very simple coat that would protect drivers and automobiles from dust that would get onto them. This specific duster is actually a man's duster. Men's buttons, they're on the right. If you look closely, her buttons are on the right. So she was wearing this because working in, the stacks of a library, dust gets on books, her clothing is protected. And it's just fascinating. She was very high up in the social circle. So she had access to, high couture pieces, but she was still, wearing something that a man was wearing.
And again, they're all my favorite pieces, but this is another truly one of my favorite pieces because this is very well loved. So how can we tell that she loved this duster?
Yes, so she loved this duster. There are so many little mends on it. And the best mend that you can see in these photos is the one on the left on her collar lapel. She got a hole on it, she would just patch it up and she would continue wearing it. Maybe she was sentimental because, she was the first female state librarian. So this garment really represented that position for her. We don't know, she's not around to tell us that, but it is very cool to see how much she loved this piece.
So speaking of well-loved pieces, I think we need to hop over to our next piece paired with this stunning portrait. So tell us a little bit about who wore this and the history of the piece.
So this was worn by Alice Lee Thomas Stevenson. And what is absolutely amazing is that she has a portrait that was painted by Alfred Klotz. And she is sitting, posing for this portrait in the dress that is in the exhibit. And we paired them together so you can see.
So we can see that the artist Klotz, he did take a little bit of liberty when painting this dress. So what's similar and what's a little different?
Yes, so what's similar is that you can actually see that she has this orange waistband that goes along. And it's hard to tell in this picture of the painting, but he is so intricate with getting the beadwork that is along the waist. It is the exact same. So he changed the color of the skirt to make sure that your focus went to her face. But there is no doubt that that is the same dress.
Beautiful. And so what is the significance of choosing this specific dress for a portrait?
So honestly, thinking about what would you choose to wear if you're going to be painted by a very well-known artist, what would you choose to have live, forever as this painting? She chose to wear a Baltimore maker's dress. The dressmaker, her name was Betty Foixel, and she was also wearing French Parisian couture, which is on the right. So it's pretty significant that she chose to represent Baltimore in this.
That's wonderful. And I think, again, for the sake of time, we need to go to our our final piece here, this beautiful opera dress, which was worn by Amelia Himes Walker. She was an opera singer, and this is the piece that she chose to wear for her very last performance. After her career as a singer, she shifted careers, and she worked and was really a wonderful advocate for the women's suffrage movement. So she, like Julia Emery, who was another Maryland suffragist, they would protest, they would speak out, they would advocate for the suffrage movement, and she actually ended up being arrested for doing so, and she was sent to a workhouse for 60 days. So workhouses, one of the famous ones is Occoquan in Virginia. They were notorious for the mistreatment of suffragists. Women were forced to be jailed. They lived in deplorable conditions. They were fed food that was rotten and unsafe to eat. But after her imprisonment, Amelia Himes Walker, she chose to continue to wear the clothing she was forced to wear in the workhouse. So how can clothing be used as performance?
Yes, so this dress was worn to her last public performance as an opera singer in 1915. So that's one side of a performance, literally, where It's a very avant-garde design. It's closer to the 1920s, but I mean, it's a theatrical piece, so it's going to be more risky and more daring than wearing, these workhouse uniforms that really demonstrated the deplorable conditions. It's a performance on its own. You're visually showing people what was happening to you. And just goes with today. Clothing is such an indicator of who you are, personality, where you stand in society. It's how you present yourself and what people first notice.
Like RuPaul says, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. But
perfect quote.
I know we are running out of time, so this is just, again, a quick highlight of the almost 100 pieces we have in this exhibit. If you want more information on other pieces and the history of the wearers, we do offer virtual field trips for groups. So if you're interested, you're welcome to reach out to me. I've got contact information here on the screen. But I think in our last few minutes, it's time to open it up to a Q&A. So I know we've seen a lot of questions coming in. So you have a burning question, please put it in the Q&A function, and Emily and I will go through and see what you all are asking.
Thanks so much, guys. That was awesome. I learned a lot. There's so many hidden stories like you talked about this whole time. We have a lot of really great questions. Many of them are very specific to some of the garments that you showed. So we're going to ask those to you guys offline so you can talk specifically about them. The first question, though, that I'm going to ask you is, before the invention of the washing machine, how were these garments cleaned? Some of them are so intricate. The fabric is so fine. I can't imagine cleaning some of the silk or wool. Can you talk about that? And maybe if there's any indication of soiling in what you found.
Yeah, so that is such a common question because, it's something we do in the normal everyday to day life. So textile is very expensive. You don't want them to soil. So you would actually wear multiple layers of undergarments. So you would wear a chemise, petticoats, and that would act as a barrier between you and your actual dress. They also had underarm guards, almost. They were pads of lamb's wool, and that would soak up any sweat. So that would protect your underarms from discoloring from the natural chemical reaction in your sweat. And then with regular soiling, some fabrics, they can be washed if they're cotton, or silk, it requires more of an intense process. I personally don't know how silks were cleaned.
Thanks, Emily.
So there are a couple questions revolving around the wealthy and how they took care of their clothing, and if they had a dressmaker in the home, or where in Maryland perhaps they would take it if it wasn't in-house, and also maybe how many garments would a wealthy woman or gentleman own?
So in terms of having a dressmaker, maybe they would do it in themselves. That was an option more for working class, maybe upper working class. For the wealthier women who were going to a professional, there were many women who were dressmakers nearby. It's hard to track how many there are. They're often lost in, the directories. So you can see that they have a title next to them that'll say dressmaker. So often it would just be a neighborhood, like a neighbor.
What about for the Ridgely family? Do you know if they had an in-house, or did they take it downtown, or someone in the area?
Personally, I don't know, but it's very possible that Hampton has those documents that reveal it, especially because they did have so many enslaved people and servants who were working for them that it's possible one was specialized as a dressmaker.
We saw a lot of engagement when you all were talking about morning wear, and I think it's a really fascinating subject that a lot of people, expressed interest in. There's a question from Carol. She wants to know if men ever had mourning wear or if it was only a female spouse or wife who would mourn.
Yes, so men did mourn as well. They had clothing that they were wearing in order to fit into that protocol. It was much less intense though as women. Women would have to update their complete wardrobes typically. For men, they probably already had a black outfit of some sort. And for hats, they would add a crepe band, crepe being a very dull silk wool fabric. And they would put that on their hat, maybe as an armband. So they did have their own mourning clothes.
And I think we're going to ask one more question. Yeah, I'm glad, Martha, thanks for asking the morning questions. There are a lot of morning questions because it is very fascinating, and I guess it's something that we don't do today. So it's really interesting. Let's see. Elizabeth is asking that in the United States, was livery always worn by enslaved persons, or did were livery worn by hired servants as well? Was there just...
Yes. It would be also worn by hired servants.
Got it. Okay. Then there are lots of questions, and I hope you all are not too tipsy out there or you're drinking your water or lemonade. Thank you for joining Martha and myself and our colleagues, Ashlee and Emily, this evening. And another reminder, let's get body together next week at our Colonial Trivia Night. It's going to be lots of fun. Register now for this virtual program on Thursday, July 23rd. And they're all free. It's free. So thank you so much for supporting our free virtual programming, and we'll see you next time.